Hey all, your OS reviews. A couple of days back we checked out the KZ Carls, which I liked as a budget pair of true wireless buds with a pretty cool transparent design for around $30. Well, today we're taking a look at another product that they have released alongside it called the KZ Saga. Instead, it's more of a traditional pair of IEMs or in-ear monitors that uses an analog 3.5mm cable to plug into music players, laptops, and phones. And these wired products are more of the bread and butter of this brand KZ, as they've been pretty successful in producing budget HiFi products in the past. This one retails for under $30 as well, although I've seen it on sale at times for only $10 or $15, making it another really budget entry. And for more discerning listeners and audiophiles, again, having a traditional cable that you plug into your device can technically reduce any latency or lag that Bluetooth may introduce without any loss of detail or compression happening, since the signal isn't being transferred wirelessly. What's interesting is that the KZ Saga actually comes in two iterations. There's a standard balanced version, which is a little bit more neutral sounding, and there's also a bass boosted version that we have here. As the name implies, it will give you a bit more kick in the lower frequency. And likewise, there's two versions, one which includes no microphone as part of the cable, and another one that has an inline mic that you can pick between. All of these variants, though, are using a 10mm dynamic driver. So KZ describes this as having a full metal housing and touting strong audio performance across bass, mids, as well as trebles for a entry-level pair of IEMs at least, which is why they're dubbing these as quote-unquote the ultimate endgame dynamic IEMs, aka trying to be one of the best sounding IEMs for sub $50. They claim the driver here is designed in-house using a standard 2-prong copper cable that is also detachable, so you can replace the parts if it ever fries. Here's a look at how the sound curve varies between the bass boosted version versus the balanced variant. So it is rather subtle, particularly in the mids. Nothing has really been changed. It's just the bass boosted here in red just adds a touch more kick in the lower frequency. However, when it comes to trebles, actually the balanced version, as you can tell, there might be a little bit more treble forward by just a hair. Although the tuning as a whole isn't going to be night and day apart. It has a fairly clean design, and again, that metal shell is another, I guess, selling point in this entry-level price range, being a little bit more well built perhaps compared to the typical plastic buds. Here's also a dissection chart of the various components inside, as well as a quick example of what it looks like when you're wearing them. So the wire goes behind the ears, like most IEMs, to provide a bit more of a snug fit if you are walking around, which is also why you see musicians, artists performing typically wearing monitors like these. They kind of stay in place a little bit better. Packaging is quite minimal, with just the buds themselves here on top, along with the 3.5mm audio cable having a KZ branding there at the end, kind of a translucent shell going on. Connector tips are also gold plated, also coated in a little bit more rubber towards the top as you're wearing it for a bit more comfort, and kind of conforms into this shape. You'll also find two additional sets of silicone tips. One is already pre-attached, so you have small, medium, and large to pick between for better ergonomics and also a warranty card. What you won't find in the packaging, though, would be any protective carrying case or foam tips. Kind of expected, though, for a really entry-level model. They had to cut some of those corners, with most of the resources going into the actual IEMs themselves as compared to the packaging or other contents. Which, speaking of, I have to give kudos to KZ because they definitely look and feel more expensive than the price here would imply. Again, crafted out of a chunk of zinc alloy, which is super shiny, chrome-like, and they have a very reassuring density to it, also catching the light in a pretty interesting and dramatic way. So from a design and build perspective, I would say they've done a good job for a budget pair. Granted, the full metal design does mean they are maybe a touch heavier compared to resin or polycarbonate plastic pairs, but these are still impressively built. We have just the connection cable here, and we can see that the silicone tips do also have a slightly interesting texture to provide even more grip as you're wearing it. Passive noise isolation, of course. These wired IEMs will not have any ANC or active noise cancellation, but that is par for the course, and there is going to be just a mesh there. And here's what it looks like with the cables attached, pretty much a one-to-one match with the images that we saw there from earlier. So overall, quite stylish. Maybe the only slight con of this chrome finish, though, is that it can be a bit of a fingerprint magnet and may scratch a little bit more easily, but I still like the design overall. Again, the wing design also helps alleviate some of the weight as you're wearing them, plus the shape of the IEMs are also molded in a way that they are slightly more ergonomic as you're popping them in. They were quite secure in my experience after walking around, wearing them for just 2 or 3 hours. They felt snug without adding too much fatigue or strain, which is certainly good. Again, as traditional wired headphones, you don't have to ever charge them back up. You simply plug it into your device and you're ready to go. For phones that don't have a 3.5mm headphone jack anymore, you can choose to use a dongle, or I think the main target audience would be for folks that care a bit more about the audio quality and are okay with losing a bit of convenience of them not being wireless, for example. So they would likely already have a dedicated player, a DAP, that touts a standard headphone jack. Just keep in mind that if you are trying to look for a pair of headphones primarily for sports and exercise, then it's probably not the main use case of something like these, just because, yes, they stay nicely in place because of the hook design, but the wire, if it bounces up and down, can still produce a little bit of noise, and the cable may occasionally get a little bit more tangled together compared to a true wireless bud design like these, which are a bit more convenient for, again, exercise and extreme sports. But with potentially higher audio performance that you can get out of a pair like these, they're more designed for closer listening, sessions where you might be sitting down, or if you're lightly walking around. It's not unique to only this pair, but just something I wanted to briefly flag. And now moving into audio quality and performance, which is the most important part, I would say that the slogan Casey had at the start, even though it sounded really ambitious and I had my doubts, actually did ring true. Out of the pairs of IEMs I've tested out for sub $50, these were in fact one of the strongest pairs. To further elaborate on that, when you're listening to a drum beat, you definitely feel that impact and kick from the perspective of bass. At the same time, it doesn't really overpower the mids or trebles either, even on this bass boosted model. So for instance, when it came to the trebles, it didn't sound too harsh or piercing. If you're listening to vocals and instrumentals, still sounding quite smooth and overall just very enjoyable. The same thing goes for mids. They're also warm and pleasant sounding. So Casey have done a surprisingly good job with that L-shaped tuning, pretty accurate from the perspective of the diagram that we saw there from earlier in terms of describing the sound. Also, for 10mm dynamic drivers, they offered a surprisingly pretty wide soundstage, offering above average separation when it came to various instrumentals and sounds I was able to pick apart, catching many of the nuances and details in studio recordings. Furthermore, volume output was also more than satisfactory, although again that can depend on the device that you're plugging into, the amplifier or DAC chip built into your player. But testing it with a couple of music players I had on hand, I felt like it was still very comfortable from a volume point of view. So all of this contributes to a pretty enjoyable listening experience, with more nuances I would say compared to any $15 or $30 pair of wireless buds I've tried, and that is also true compared to the KZ Carls, their wireless buds that we reviewed earlier. Yes, it sounds great for a pair of Bluetooth buds, but these are just a notch higher if you're looking for even more nuances and precision to the sound, making them enjoyable for almost all genres of music that I was listening to. So thankfully, it's not a case of just marketing spiel, but rather the sound quality is indeed excellent, so it could be a great option if you're trying to experiment or dabble into higher sounding headphones, testing out the waters without really breaking the bank. However, if your wallets run deeper, then it goes without saying there are even more premium pairs out there which pack in more sophisticated drivers and components, for example using planar drivers or stacked multi-driver solutions that can squeeze out even more detail in audio frequencies like the mid-bass, as well as trebles being even more responsive and detail-filled, but that would be a huge delta in terms of price. For example, the cheapest planar headphones would be at least $100 to $150, so you can get 10 to 15 pairs of these for the cost of one. So it's all about setting the correct expectations and also kind of a tale of diminishing returns, where if you're trying to chase after those extreme ends, you can definitely do so, but using more established components, including just a regular dynamic driver like these, with good tuning as well as good build quality, surprisingly this is actually getting you already very good sound, maybe around 80–85% as good for a significantly lower cost, which is what makes them an excellent value pair of budget IEMs. So you can check out more details if interested in the links down below. Again, a pretty impressive showing for a budget price point, easy to drive, satisfying and clean sound, along with having a pretty sturdy build and design that has a bit more character to it than we usually see. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. It's been just a closer look at the KZ Saga.